I still believe that it's directionally true that the people who have the best chance to survive and thrive, if job loss comes to your industry or your company,
Hmm.
will be the people who are most AI literate and are the most high performing people, which has always been true. Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Show, the podcast that helps your business grow smarter by making AI approachable and actionable. My name is Paul Raitzer. I'm the founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute, and I'm your host. Each week, I'm joined by my co-host and Marketing AI Institute Chief Content Officer, Mike Kaput, as we break down all the AI news that matters and give you insights and perspectives that you can use to advance your company and your career. Join us as we accelerate AI literacy for all. Welcome to episode 91 of the Artificial Intelligence Show. I'm your host, Paul Raitzer, along with my co-host, as always, Mike Kaput. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Paul. How
How are
you
things
doing?
going with you? It is Eclipse Day.
It
We
is.
are, we are recording this on Monday, April 8th, 10:15 a.m. It was a awesome weekend in Cleveland. My daughter and I actually went to the women's Final Four championship yesterday, which was really cool
That's
to get to
awesome.
take her to that. She's 12 and loves basketball, so it was just such a cool experience to get to be there. And then Cleveland is like the center of the world today. Every Airbnb is sold out. Every hotel is sold out. People are here to watch the eclipse. We're in like prime range in the U.S. to see it. It's just waiting for the clouds to go away. So I hope everyone's not disappointed today. Oh man. All right. So I am back from spring break. I'm trying to get my feet back under me after a week away. Had a lot of time to think. Didn't work too much, but had a lot of time to think about AI while I was just laying on the beach. So this is my first thing I'm doing back from spring break. So hopefully my mind comes along with me today. All right. Today's episode is brought to us by Rasa.io. Rasa is the ultimate platform for AI powered newsletters. If you're looking to transform your email newsletter into a powerful, engaging tool that truly resonates with your audience, Rasa.io is the game changer you need. Their smart newsletter platform personalizes content for each and every subscriber, ensuring every message you send is highly relevant and incredibly engaging. The tool also allows you to automate away the tedious tasks that go into newsletter production, stay ahead of the curve, and make your emails a must read. Join the 500 plus organizations already making their newsletters smart. Visit rasa.io/MAII today. Again, that's rasa.io/MAII. All right, Mike, let's get rolling on the main topics.
Sounds good, Paul. So first up, one of the companies that is making the most money from generative AI right now is actually a consulting firm. Accenture just reported its second quarter fiscal result, and a line item in these results jumped out at AI watchers. In the results, the company reported that it had what it calls, quote, generative AI new bookings, and these totaled over $600 million in this past quarter. If you annualize that at the current rate, that means Accenture is on track to make a whopping $2.4 billion a year from selling generative AI services. Now, what are they selling exactly? Well, the results don't say, and there was some speculation online about what these actually entail. So diving into Accenture's website, they are advertising generative AI implementation services and business optimization solutions, where they actually improve productivity using their own pre-built AI solutions. And we also know from our discussion in episode 89 of the podcast that Accenture recently teamed up with AWS and Anthropic to bring generative AI to the enterprise. So, Paul, I think my first question for you here is like, clearly the market is responding to a major need here. I mean, deploying generative AI in the enterprise seems to be something that is in quite high demand. How much help do companies need here? And where do firms like Accenture fit in?
Yeah, I'm sure you hear it all the time, Mike, when you're out doing, public speaking, especially for me when you do talks in front of like CEOs and business leaders, you just get a line of people coming up saying, "Can you guys do this for us?" Like they don't know where to turn. and everyone is trying to figure it out. So if you present to people, the kind of the steps we usually recommend about building an AI council, developing your policies and principles, creating an AI roadmap. The AI roadmap is always the one where like, who does that? Like, who can we turn to? Now, what Accenture is doing is they're at the very top of the market, obviously. I mean, these are like Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies they're working with, $100 million plus deals probably. So they're doing massive deals with big companies. And I think the 2 billion is just absolutely scratching the surface of like the size of this market. This is something we've looked at because, again, we see this demand all the time. Back in 2016, when Marketing Institute was created underneath my agency, PR 2020, where Mike and I worked together, that was actually my vision for PR 2020. My agency was we were just going to become like an AI transformation agency. We were going to help companies do this, but the demand just wasn't there. It was we were way too early. I mean, we had some pretty large clients at the time, and they just didn't care. Like they weren't even thinking about this stuff. So, I think that when I look at this space, the consulting, advisory firm, agency space, this is the future. There's no doubt. Like we did our AI for Agencies Summit. Was that November, Mike, I think
Yeah.
last year?
Yeah.
And so I went back and looked at a slide I had, and I kind of laid out like the opportunity for agencies and consulting firms. And some of the areas that I identified were large language model strategy and implementation, AI education and training, AI technology integration, change management, and then a couple more like longer term was AI agent support, and then augmented creativity. So those are some of the areas we looked at. So to try and figure out like where is the Accenture money coming from, I actually went and looked at the earnings call. So it was March 24th, I think. It was late March 2024. And so they talked more detailed about where this money is coming from. So let's say Julie Sweet, the chair and CEO, in the earnings call said, we are also had over 600 million in new Gen AI bookings, taking us to 1.1 billion in Gen AI sales in the first half of their fiscal year, expanding our early lead in Gen AI, which is core to our clients' reinvention. We now have over 53,000 skilled data and AI practitioners against our goal of doubling our data and AI workforce from 40 to 80,000 by the end of fiscal year 2026. So for me, like, as I'll go through a couple other findings from the earnings call, but basically what the way to think about this as a listener is we've been looking for hard data to show demand, adoption, and opportunity. And so I think this is a really good example of kind of a leading edge firm that is now showing the demand is skyrocketing for this kind of stuff. Julie went on to say all clients have to get there, meaning transformation. They need to get to the technology transformation. They need to get to reinvention. And that's why you're seeing, even at the constraints, you're seeing that early interest in Gen AI. With 1 billion in sales in the first 6 months of the year, that is the fastest we have ever built sales in an emerging technology. And what it tells you is that clients understand the importance of AI, that they're going to have to reinvent every part of the enterprise. So again, that was quote directly from their CEO. And then they went on throughout the call to talk about some of the examples. So Merck is a client, and they said they're doing launching generative AI training program for their employees to create world-class digital leaders. Riyadh Air, they're working with to do more personalized travel experiences for customers. Mondelez International, which has well-known brands like Oreo and Cadbury, they're working to reinvent how they satisfy customers. They talked about an example where they're doing like a complex new need integration across large language models. So they're basically figuring out how to do like the symphony of large language models within companies, and then how to optimize prompts based on the model that's going to be used. So they're building kind of these capabilities internally. A lot of talk in the earnings call about the structure and simplification and modernization of data systems. In one example, they talked about a client that had over 50 different enterprise data sources and how they're trying to integrate those into a single data source so they can build better generative AI capabilities. So, I mean, when you look across what they're doing and where the demand is, it's still early, and a lot of it is very foundational. Like they're trying to get the data in place. They're trying to educate and train teams. There was one quote they had about their education and training. Oh, here it was. So they acquired Udacity in March, which was an ed tech training platform. And in their newsroom announcement, which we'll put in the findings, it said, according to Accenture research, Business leaders say their number one challenge is their inability to upskill their workforces, with 51% of organizations starting to see negative impacts from worsening IT skills and shortages. This is the one that caught my attention. In addition, 94% of workers say they want to learn new skills to work with generative AI, but only 5% of organizations provide Gen AI training at scale. That is absolutely aligned with everything we've seen. We've been doing our State of Marketing AI report for, I think we're in our fourth year now, third or fourth year. And lack of education and training has been the number one obstacle every year. And our data says, I think, I forget what last year was, like somewhere around like 13% or something had any form of internal education and training for AI. So yeah, I mean, I think again, like what we're seeing here is early indications and actual hard data to show that companies are trying to figure this out. I mean, is this aligned with what you're hearing when you're out on the speaking circuit, Mike?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's important to reiterate the point for anyone who's maybe unfamiliar with either the consulting and agency space or just the overall enterprise needs related to AI. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Like these companies aren't able to go hire many people internally that have this type of education. You're almost by default forced. If you're not one of the major tech companies who are hoovering up a lot of the technical talent, you're forced to have to work with an outside party because, to my knowledge, it's really the biggest avenue for firms that have people educated in the right way to be able to either deliver implementations or foundational education.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a two-tier approach. You got to upskill, your own people, provide the literacy within your own team, and develop the next generation of workers and leaders internally. But then you have to lean on people outside. Like I wouldn't be surprised if this is a $5 to $10 billion piece of business for Accenture in the next 2 years.
Mm.
And I would think that there's lots of opportunity. Like they're not even working with the smaller businesses. And this is what we keep stressing to people is like, if you run an agency or if you're independent consulting or whatever it is, there is such massive opportunity to help companies figure this out. And this is, again, like we're in the first inning of this AI transformation phase. And as things start evolving, there's going to be all kinds of opportunities that open, whether you want to go vertical specific and work just with like law firms or engineering firms or retail or whatever your niche is, or you want to be more broad. So again, if I was still running an agency, this is what I would have been doing. I mean, I sold that agency in 2021, so it's not a world I've been playing in much. But certainly through the Institute, we've done some AI consulting. We try and limit it because it's me and Mike. The capacity is pretty low for us to do the consulting work, so we've been pretty limited in it. We may evolve that. There may be some other things we do in the future, but at the moment, like it's hard to look at this and not see just billions of dollars of opportunity ahead.
So, in our second big topic today, if your company is using AI to do anything like producing content, make decisions,
Which,
or
if you're listening to this show, you likely are. It's
you
probably
likely
quite
are
legit.
actually yeah, exactly. A couple of new reports are things you should be paying attention to because we're seeing a couple big indications that legal experts are sounding the alarm that the AI industry is, in their words, steaming towards a legal iceberg. So first, a report in the Wall Street Journal kicked off by saying, quote, legal scholars, lawmakers, and at least one Supreme Court justice agree that companies will be liable for the things their AIs say and do, and that the lawsuits are just beginning. It then details the opinions of several legal experts that if you are using AI for the things I mentioned, you wind up taking on legal liability. And that includes liability for the outputs of generative AI, which can extend to all the companies using these tools, not just the ones building them. And the article goes on to say, quote, companies that simply use generative AI, say by using OpenAI's tech as part of a service delivered to a customer, are likely to be responsible for the outputs of such systems. Another report in the New York Times that just came out also reveals that there are significant problems with how perhaps these models and tools are being trained and built. They say, quote, OpenAI, Google, and Meta ignored corporate policies, altered their own rules, and discussed skirting copyright law in order to train their models. The article then goes on to report in depth on the efforts at those companies that appear to have used data in murky or problematic ways to feed their models, including, somewhat controversially and relevant to several AI discussions happening right now, data from YouTube. So, Paul, this starts to mirror basically exactly what you discussed during our AI for Writers Summit with IP law expert Krista Laser last month. And in that discussion, which I revisited as we talked about running this topic on the podcast, Krista outlined some top things to understand about generative AI and copyright as it stands right now in the US. So this includes the fact that if you did not know, you do not own anything created with generative AI right now, and you cannot defend a copyright claim on it. There's an element to this that your work for hire agreements with employees, agencies, freelancers do not give you ownership over their work if they used AI to create it, since they don't, in fact, own it either. And then there's this overall problem that individually as a user or a company, you may be violating laws that you don't realize by using generative AI because of how the tools were trained. So, Paul, just kind of like connecting all these dots here. There's a lot to unpack here, but it really just does sound like there is massive uncertainty ahead when it comes to the legal implications of using these tools and of how the tools were trained. Is that kind of your sense of where this stands today?
Yeah, and I mean, the headlines are coming more frequently now. I think the mainstream media is certainly like picking up and running with this story now. There's nothing like really new per se that has come out other than like the New York Times article, for example, had all kinds of interesting inside source information. They had emails and like recordings of internal meetings with executives. So they were disclosing more about like how widespread this is and how blatant the disregard for law was within the big tech companies to do this, and how pretty much once OpenAI did it, everybody's like, well, they did it. Like, let's just go do it. So we're starting to learn more and more about the internal workings of how decisions were made to skirt these laws in the training of the models and what that means to us as end users. So a couple of things come to mind. One, you kind of alluded to this, Mike, but laws vary by country. So, oftentimes Mike and I will talk specifically about US law because it's the thing we're the most familiar with. But I do know that, like for our AI for Writers Summit, we had registrants from 93 different countries. So in the interview with Krista, we wanted to make sure that we talked about other country law around this stuff. The U.S. copyright law, to my knowledge, so they came out with their guidance last March, so over a year ago, on generative AI, where they basically said what you outlined, that you don't own it. That if generative AI creates it, nobody owns it. The prompt is not human authorship, not enough for human authorship, and therefore a generated work isn't owned by anyone. To my knowledge, despite their listening sessions they've been going through, I don't believe they have updated any additional guidance or given any additional indications about how copyright law may evolve in the United States. Now, what does this mean for you as business users of this technology? Two things kind of come to mind. One is, again, you don't own it if you use it to create it. So if you need a copyright on something, you really can't use generative AI to do it. And two is the bigger question around, like, are you at risk? Like if for some reason courts decide that OpenAI and Meta and Google and Anthropic and everybody else trained their models, stole copyrighted data, and therefore the people who used those models to create things are now liable. Microsoft and Google and maybe others announced that last year that they would cover the legal costs of that. So we'll put the link in the show notes. But so I have the September 7th one from Microsoft, Brad Smith, the VP and president, where they said that they were announcing a Copilot copyright commitment where they would assume the legal risks and costs if you were sued for copyright infringement due to use of Copilot. And then they actually updated it in January of 2024 to extend it to basically anything done under Azure. So that's how these big tech companies are trying to like make it safe for you to use their tools, where you don't have to worry necessarily about being sued for the use of the models. Uh, I don't know if that's going to make your legal department like feel much better about it, but that's kind of where it's at. So, yeah, the thing you mentioned, the New York Times article. So there was a couple of things jumped out to me on this one. So one was, we've heard about Whisper, like
Mm.
OpenAI's incredible technology. Some of you have probably used Whisper. Like if you go in and you talk to it, you're using that technology. But apparently, that technology was created to transcribe YouTube videos to train their models, and they knew that that was certainly ethically questionable and likely legally questionable to do it. And that was a prelude to what we talked about a couple of episodes ago, where they appear to have used YouTube videos to train Sora as well. But then Cade Metz and the other New York Times writers said that Google employees were aware OpenAI had harvested YouTube videos for data, but they didn't stop them because they had done the same thing themselves. And even though Google owns YouTube, they don't own the content. They don't have the rights to take that content and train on it. And so basically, everyone is violating all of these rights and just sort of going, full steam ahead, figuring out if we got to pay some fines or things catch up to us, we'll figure it out. And then they even had a recording of a Meta executive where it said OpenAI seemed to have used copyright material without permission, and it would take Meta acknowledged it would just take too long to negotiate licenses with publishers, artists, musicians in the news industry. They said, according to recording. So basically, like, they knew what they were doing wasn't probably legal, but everyone was doing it, and like let's just go. So the debate becomes like, people can get, I always laugh, like I'll put stuff on LinkedIn about this, and you get people who aren't lawyers state things definitively as though like they know law is like that it was fair use and they should have taken this. And you and I might take the position of like, I have no idea, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a judge, like
Mm.
I don't know what the end game ruling is. But the debate about whether or not the law is obsolete is a different story. Like, you can state your opinion that it should have been fair use. Okay, fine. That's an opinion. But we have to wait for the courts to tell us whether it actually was or not. And so that's, I don't know. That's kind of like my feeling on this, is like, we just don't know. We're all kind of observing. I think in the end, they probably pay some fines and admit that they knowingly did this, or don't admit it and just pay the fines. And we probably move on, and it doesn't slow down adoption, and it doesn't, slow down innovation, but it's certainly worth paying attention to. And I wouldn't be shocked, as I said on LinkedIn, if this doesn't lead to a Senate hearing. Like,
Mm.
this is the kind of thing that they love to do in Senate. Like, bring the tech company CEOs before and say, how did you train it? Did you do, it's like, make a show of it. So I don't know. I think it'll continue to gain mainstream media headlines. It'll probably gain the interest of U.S. lawmakers at some point here. I don't know that any of that really affects what any of us are going to do day to day, though.
Right. One area of this that is somewhat relevant to many of the brands listening in is, can you talk to me a little bit about how this might affect your work with an agency or a freelancer? Because we actually have a related story that came out as well from Ad Age that documented how certain brands are cracking down on how their agencies are using AI. So in some cases, they are totally restricting the use of AI without prior authorization. In others, they're rightly so worried about all the ways AI can go wrong or how it should be used. Can you walk us through, what do I have to start thinking about now that agencies don't own the output of generative AI, so therefore cannot transfer that ownership to me via a work for hire agreement?
Yeah, I mean, we say it all the time. Like, the first thing you got to do is get legal counsel involved. Like, this isn't something you're going to solve on your own. You've got to have the lawyers in the room. You've got to get the generative AI policies in place for your own team, but also for your providers, for your service providers. Like, those should extend out to the people you are contracting with to create content, whether they're freelancers or outside video producers, freelance writers or video production people, graphic designers, like whatever it is, anyone who's creating content on your behalf. you need to have clarity of what it is you're allowing them to do, and then understanding what it is that they're doing. Like how are they handling this internally? What are their people trained to do? How have their processes evolved? So yeah, I mean, I think you need to do a legal review of all of your contracts with outside service providers and make sure that if you're expecting copyright material, the material that you can own a copyright to when it's created from them, or own trademarks too, you're that is covered in your agreement with them. And our experience has been a lot of agencies and freelancers are like just trying to figure this stuff out. They don't have generative AI policies for their people, so they may not, like, their people may be using AI, and the CEOs of those agencies might not even know how they're using the AI, and they're passing off work that the CEO of the agency may actually think is legitimate work, and here they find out that their own people are using these generative AI tools without their knowledge. Like, that's a very real possibility right now.
So as we wrap up here, I'm curious, do you have any advice on elements that are important to have in a generative AI policy? We talk all the time about having this policy or a set of policies around this is such a critical first step for brands.
Yeah, I mean, like, we've gone through this a couple of times where, for me, it can be as simple as, what technologies are they allowed to use? How are they allowed to use them? Like, what is the end product they're allowed to create with it? And then, do they have to disclose the use of those technologies? So if you're working in an agency and your client is assuming copyrighted material is being passed over to them, then that would dictate that, one, you aren't even allowed to use it. Like, you can only use it for ideation and outline development, but in the actual writing, you're going to have to actually write the thing as the human. So, I think you just really need to go through the process of, what are the outputs we're trying to create? What are the ways we're using this technology? What are the agreements we have with people? And then, what does legal guide us on? So again, it often comes down simply to me, like, which technology you're allowed to use, how are you allowed to use them, and what do you have to disclose in the use of them? But again, I would always recommend, go find a great template. Like, you can go search for generative AI policy templates. I get asked all the time. I originally mentioned this, that we were building a GPT to help people develop their policies. No, I haven't finished that yet, because everybody always asks me if I've created it. But hopefully I will soon. So yeah, maybe we'll just create that. It'll help people do it. But there's great templates available online now.
So in our third big topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about the public perception of artificial intelligence, because a new segment about AI on The Daily Show is getting a ton of buzz, and it's about what they call the false promises of AI. And it features Jon Stewart skewering AI leaders for saying AI will magically kind of make everything better, when in fact, in his opinion, there are clear signs that they are actually saying it will displace labor and reduce the number of jobs. So this segment, in true kind of Daily Show fashion, features, cherry picked clips from AI leaders like Mustafa Suleyman saying AI is a fundamentally labor replacing tool. And they interview a CEO who's been publicly bragging for quite some time about firing 90% of his support staff thanks to AI. And they also mix in some clips of politicians simply saying, over the years, everyone will just have to retrain when technology takes their job. So the overall point here is that Stewart kind of is highlighting the contradiction from public AI leaders about both optimism from future productivity gains created by AI, and then how they kind of talk around what that actually means for jobs. Now, Stewart ends this segment by asking the question, after AI has taken over, what's left for the rest of us to do? So, Paul, this is just one recent example of some public backlash and apprehension around the impact of AI. And I know you had a lot of thoughts on this one. Could you walk us through how you view this?
Yeah, it's about 11-minute segment. I mean, it's worth watching. It is funny. It very much gives the perspective from the techno optimist slash EAC movement we've talked about, these people who like accelerate at all costs, no matter what, and we'll figure it all out. And we've been through transformation before, and it'll work out, and there will be jobs for everybody, and there'll be better jobs. Um, and again, like Mike and I very much like I would say, like, I'm in the let's keep going, like let's keep innovating, let's keep accelerating this. I think a lot of good is going to come from it, but I'm also of the camp, and I think Mike, you're probably similar, we should be thinking about the impact this is going to have on people. Like I am not ignorant to the disruption this could cause. Now, again, like I always laugh when people take these like really hardcore stances as though they can see into the future better than the best economists in the world who don't seem to know what's going to happen. And so you have all these people who are like, no, 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 it's going to be perfect. It's going to work out. Let's just keep going. And then you have other people who can, convinced that it's just going to be devastation and it's going to be horrible. And I'm kind of in the middle, like I actually don't know what's going to happen. We shared the AI timeline. I think it was episode 87, where I was like trying to give my best projection of what I thought might occur for jobs and for the economy. And to recap that is like, I do think we're going to have job loss. Like, I don't know any other way around this, that there are going to be certain industries and professions. Some it'll happen sooner than others. So like the technology industry, yeah, SaaS is going to keep seeing jobs. Like it's going to feel like it's happening right now, and it's happening fast in the SaaS world. Customer service, like likely in the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to feel really painful. Like that profession is going to rapidly change. I could see things like BDRs, like, sales. I could see things like junior associates at law firms. Like there are definitely roles that I think in the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to start changing really fast for. But when you zoom out at a macro level, I don't think we see massive disruption to jobs in the next 12 to 18 months, but that's just trying to kind of read the market and where we see the technology going, and what we're hearing from, researchers and entrepreneurs, like trying to make our best educated guess at what happens. But the thing that I find interesting about this Jon Stewart episode is I think this is an indication of what we can expect as more and more industries and professions start to be affected. This sort of, I wouldn't say this is necessarily like societal backlash. This is more commentary, and on a specific segment of people who have this very techno-optimist perspective. But I do think that as more people start to get impacted, you could start to get some backlash from the media and from society. And so I think that all of us who are, kind of more living AI day to day and probably have broader context around the depth of this story. Like for some people, again, they'll see a 60 Minutes episode and that is all they know about AI. And like, they're convinced whatever they saw in 60 Minutes is the thing. Or they watch Jon Stewart and that's the first real interaction they have with AI, and they like think that is all the truth. Well, all of us who, like you and I doing the show, people who listen to the show, we're thinking and hearing way more about this. And we have all this context to build our own points of view and perspectives on jobs and the impact on industries and things like that. And so I think you can step back and just be more realistic about what's actually going on. But yeah, so I just think it's interesting from a societal perspective of how we're going to start dealing with these layers of complexity as more people take an interest in the topic, more people in the media, more people in government. It's just gonna, again, it's gonna become there's gonna be more depth to the story to be considering and to be evaluated against like how different people look at it. I mean, you watched it too, Mike. Did you have any other thoughts on it or any opinions on it?
No, I really enjoyed the approach and the clip. I tend to agree with you. I think where we're really going to see this perspective continue to rear its head is as we see headlines of possible layoffs or disruptions due to AI. I have no idea what that will look like, but I could see there being quite a strong narrative eventually as we try to use AI as an explanation for all sorts of possible labor displacement that happens in the next several years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll address one other thing. So over the weekend it came up this a year and a half. I don't remember when I first used it, but I included in an Intro to AI for Marketers class I was teaching, I think was the first time I said it, that AI won't replace marketers, but marketers who use AI will replace marketers who don't. Actually, I think it was in the Piloting AI course series in the end of 2022. So I may have actually said this like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I see people like who don't like that quote, who like think it's just a load of crap. And I never really understood the reaction people have to it. But for context, like if you've heard this quote, and if it does, cause you to have an unfriendly reaction, I want to explain where it came from. So in 2017, so back in 2015, 16, there was this belief that radiologists were done, that AI was going to become superhuman at reading CAT scans, MRI scans, and that we just wouldn't need radiologists to do what they do. The machines would just take over. And so that was kind of like a growing belief. And then in 2017, Curtis Langlotz, I think is how you say his name, professor of radiology and biomedical informatics at Stanford University School of Medicine, said at an annual meeting of the Radiological Society of North America, radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't. So his whole premise was the AI wasn't going to take over, but the tools were going to be so good, and the radiologists who used them were going to be so much more effective, so much more productive than the radiologists who didn't, that over time, you either used AI or you didn't. But if you weren't using it, you weren't going to have a job in radiology. It was going to become that critical to what people did. And so I looked out and I thought, wow, that's basically going to be true for every knowledge work profession. Writers, designers, engineers, product developers, whatever it was, salespeople, that the people who used AI would become so much more efficient at their jobs that when the time came for jobs to be impacted by AI, you were going to look around at your staff. You can be a staff of 10 or a staff of 10,000, and you were going to say, who are the most productive people on this team? Who are the most efficient people on this team? Who create the most value in the company? And my belief at the time was, well, it's obviously going to be the people who are better at AI. Like, if you become adept at using these tools and you get through kind of the fear and anxiety of AI and everything, and you say, like, I'm just going to figure out how to do them, and I'm going to become 10% more efficient or 30% more efficient or 70% more efficient, whatever it is, that when the time came, people are like, wow, we don't need as many humans doing accounting or law or marketing or graphic design or whatever it is. We don't need as many of these people around. These are the 10 best. Like, they're outperforming everybody by 30%. That's who we're keeping. That was the premise of the quote, that AI wouldn't replace marketers or writers or designers, but the people using AI would replace the ones who don't. I don't know how that's not still true. Like, I see all of these people like complaining about this quote and saying it's ridiculous. Like, how is it ridiculous? Like, I don't understand the logic of how it's not true. But what I have evolved to do is, like, I don't use it anymore in my talks and in my classes. And the reason is I don't know that it holds true over time. Like, I do think that there comes a point with AI agents and like this evolution of intelligence explosion, like we talked about in episode 87, where maybe it actually does replace people too. Like, maybe we just don't need that many people, and even the ones who are using it, there isn't going to be roles for them. I don't know. Like, that is certainly a possible future. But at the moment, I still kind of believe that it's directionally true that the people who have the best chance to survive and thrive, if job loss comes to your industry or your company, will be the people who are most AI literate and are the most high performing people, which has always been true. So if you assume AI improves your performance and you can outperform your peers, then it is just a tool to make you more valuable in the company, which makes you safer when job loss happens. Like, and so again, if someone has a perspective that makes that false, I'd love to hear it. But just, I've thought logically about this for like 2 years, and I've yet to find the fault in it, other than the people who just assume all jobs are going away and they're making like a leap 5 years out and saying, well, the AI is just going to take everybody's job. What are you talking about? It's like, okay, maybe, but I don't know that to be true yet. I don't know, Mike. Like, am I crazy? Like, do you have another perspective on this?
No,
You've heard me say this like a million times.
I've always struggled with some of the backlash against that type of quote too, because it seems pretty obvious. If you change the analogy to any other technology, if I said to you, hey, computers probably aren't going to replace people, but people using computers versus those who don't will probably be more economically valuable, that seems obvious to me.
Right, like if you stay on the tool talk, it's like, okay, if you're a sales leader but you refuse to use a CRM and you still want to live in your Excel, which
Right.
Mike, you and
Right.
I mean, going back to when we were at the agency, we were still in 2020
Yeah.
dealing with clients who had sales teams who refused to enter data into Salesforce, and they still managed it through CRM or a notepad.
Hmm.
And that's what I feel like this is. It's like, okay, there's no way those people keep their job. It's kind of the similar analogy of like, you have a new tool that makes you so much better at your job
Hmm.
and you refuse to use it. I'm sorry, I'm going to replace you with someone who's using the tools. That's basically all the quote is saying. So yeah, I'm sorry. Like it's not, and it's not even like a hot button issue. Like it bothers me that much. Like I just kind of laugh at it. Um, but again, I think it's pretty sound logic. Like
Yeah.
AI tools help you become a higher performer. And if a company is going to reduce job force because technology makes their workforce more efficient, it's pretty logical that the people who use the tools to be better performers keep their jobs over the people who don't.
Yep.
So I don't know. Probably
Seems
enough
pretty
on that for
obvious to me. All right, so let's dive into some rapid fire topics here. So first up, Amazon is making some big moves in AI, and some of them are maybe a little uncomfortable because the company just announced a $2.75 billion investment into Anthropic, which we reported on in the past. It's the largest investment that Amazon has made into a company, and obviously a clear way to compete with Microsoft slash OpenAI. But Amazon's relationship with Anthropic is far less cozy than it appears, says reporter Alex Heath in The Verge. That Heath learned that the company's AGI team, led by SVP Rohit Prasad at Amazon, is trying to compete directly with Anthropic by building their own flagship model. Amazon's flagship model they're building is codenamed Olympus. And the goal, it sounds like, is for Olympus to outperform the newest Claude models from Anthropic by the middle of this year. When Olympus is released, The Verge says, quote, it'll be plugged into nearly every part of Amazon and made available to other businesses through AWS. So, Paul, in the reporting from The Verge, they kind of dived into how some unnamed Amazon employees mentioned that there is this interesting dynamic where Amazon was competing with Claude, even though they are relying on Claude for many of their foundational model services and capabilities, and that everyone's kind of waiting, holding their breath until Olympus comes out. Where does Amazon stand right now in the AI race?
A couple of thoughts come to mind here. First, I think it's important to have the context that AWS is the largest cloud provider. I don't remember exact market share, but I want to say it's like low 40% of the market. So if you think about AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure as the primary cloud providers, AWS dominates that market. A couple episodes ago, we talked about early research is showing that one of the sticky factors for selecting a foundation model or the generative AI companies you work with is where is your data already at and who do you trust with that data? So it obviously makes a ton of sense that AWS and Amazon are going to continue to try and benefit from the fact that they house data from many of the largest companies in the world. Their initial strategy, going back to 2023, appeared to be the same as they do for everything else, the everything store for AI. You want an AI? Great, come on in. We got Anthropic, we got Cohere, we got our own, Titan model, whatever you need. Like we got it for you. We just want to process the data. We want to run the compute and keep, increasing your AWS bill each month. So that made a lot of sense initially. But we also know that Amazon has much broader interest in AI. So we talked on a recent episode about Rufus, which is their generative AI that's going to be infused into Amazon.com. So you're going to have a shopping assistant that you can have a conversation with. Basically, I'm going on a trip to Italy. what do I need? And it can talk to you, and it can actually recommend products based on like where you're going, like rather than you searching by filters and keywords. So they have that. We can't forget the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of robots. So actually, in a news release from October 2023 on their site, in their newsroom, we now have over 750,000 robots working collaboratively with our employees, taking on highly repetitive tasks and freeing employees up to better deliver for our customers. They're testing drones that deliver packages. Like they have a lot of use for intelligence. It's dramatically impactful to their business. So it makes a ton of sense that they wouldn't be sitting back and waiting for everyone else's models. Plus, they have a whole bunch of proprietary data. Oh, and they have Alexa. So they have all of these things that would make up the recipe for a very powerful foundation model. Data and distribution being the two ones we always talk about. They have both of those things that maybe only, I mean, Google certainly, like I'm trying to think who else could even compete. Meta, maybe different types of data, but there's only probably 3 to 5 companies in the world that have this level of data and distribution. So it would make a lot of sense to build a competing foundation model. The only other thing at least is like, man, is this a confusing space? Like you can understand how Accenture's making $2.5 billion consulting on this, because if you're a big enterprise and you're trying to figure out what to do, and you're like, oh, should I go with Cohere? Oh, wait, I can go with Cohere, but right within AWS. Oh, but AWS is building Olympus. Maybe I should like wait for, oh my gosh. Like this is why I say like we're in inning 1 of figuring out what this means to enterprises, how to adapt it. Once you do adapt it, the change management needed behind it. So yeah, it's just fascinating. But this is the first I'd heard of Olympus. Like I don't, had you heard anything about it prior to this?
No.
Yeah, I hadn't either. So yeah, just kind of another intriguing thing. And like we've been talking a lot about Apple building the next gen version of Siri. I got to imagine that Amazon is working feverishly on the next generation of Alexa as well.
So in some other news, Microsoft and OpenAI appear to be planning to build a $100 billion AI supercomputer called Stargate. Now,
I love that name.
That's a great name. You got to always have a slightly epic and sinister sci-fi name for these, I think. So this is coming from some reporting from The Information. They spoke to several sources familiar with this project, and according to the sources, the supercomputer would contain millions of specialized chips to power OpenAI's artificial intelligence and could cost upward of $100 billion. Now, for some perspective here, this is 100 times the cost of some of today's largest data centers. And while this project has not yet been formally greenlit by Microsoft, it appears to track with recent commentary from both Microsoft and OpenAI and many others about the need for massive investment in core infrastructure like the chips that power AI. For instance, in episode 83, we had reported on how Sam Altman was possibly seeking up to trillions of dollars to build AI chip infrastructure. Now, with this particular project, there is one big catch. The Information says that, quote, Microsoft's willingness to go ahead with the Stargate plan depends in part on OpenAI's ability to meaningfully improve the capabilities of its AI, which seems to indicate that GPT-5 better seriously impress Satya Nadella. And if it does, executives at Microsoft have so far discussed launching Stargate as soon as 2028 and expanding it through 2030. Now, Paul, let's talk about the kind of big picture implications here. This is 100x bigger than anything they've been doing before in this space. So it's pretty clear they're thinking very, very big and seriously planning for the future. Like, what type of AI future do they see where they need this level of infrastructure?
So I keep mentioning episode 87 today, but if you go at episode 87, the AI timeline, we kind of address why in that episode. But the why here is OpenAI in particular, and I assume Microsoft and many other leading AI researchers and companies right now continue to believe that the advancements in intelligence will follow scaling laws. That if you give more computing power, which is powered by more chips, more data, which means more data centers. So if you keep building this infrastructure capability, that the models will continue to get smarter. And they're, NVIDIA, obviously, this is why they're making so much money. Because they power a lot of the training runs. So these training runs are going to get into the billions of dollars. Like it's rumored, I think GPT-4 took, I don't know, hundreds of millions maybe to train. But we're going to, in the next couple of years, we're going to start having multi-billion-dollar training runs for these major models. And that's just the training. Then you get into the inference, which is the moment you or I ask it to do something. So you go give it a prompt, there's chips powering the compute that enables it to give an answer or to generate an image or to generate a video. So if Sora wants to be able to generate 5-minute videos, that takes a lot of compute power at inference to do that. And so they're building all of these models. So they're looking out ahead 5 years, 10 years out and saying, okay, if scaling laws continue to go, if we keep giving it more chips, if we keep giving it more data, we are going to need way more data centers. We're going to need way more energy capacity, like nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. It's why Sam invests in a nuclear fusion company. We're going to need stronger electrical grids. We're going to need all this stuff. So they're preparing for a world where this intelligent explosion occurs, and we need way more infrastructure to do the training of the models and the inference for the use of the models. And that's basically what happens. I mean, just this morning, TSMC, so Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is the linchpin to the generation of these chips. It's obviously in Taiwan. They announced this morning, the Biden administration said on Monday it planned to send up to $6.6 billion in federal grants to TSMC, and I think another $5 million in loan guarantees for a $25 billion Arizona expansion that will bring a third TSMC fabrication plant to that state. Fabrication is where fabrication of the chips. So yeah, this is a major thing, and I think we're just going to keep hearing more and more headlines about investments being made in this space. And again, from a not investing advice, but when you think about where the money is going to go, and people always ask about like, what do you invest in AI? Think about the infrastructure. Think about all the companies that are going to make all of this possible. And that's a good starting point to think about where's the money and the value going to be generated over the next decade. A lot of it is going to be in the infrastructure companies that make AI possible.
So in some other news, we have two big AI announcements that are shaking up search potentially. So first, the Financial Times reports that Google is considering charging for its AI-powered search features. One option being discussed by Google executives is adding AI-powered search to its premium subscription services. So in this proposed plan, Google's traditional search engine would remain free, while ads would still appear on basically everything. I mean, according to the Financial Times, quote, Google's traditional search engine would remain free of charge, while ads would continue to appear alongside search results, even for subscribers. Now, that's just one pathway being considered. It is not yet official, but interesting to note. Now, while Google is exploring new revenue models, the AI search startup and Google challenger, Perplexity, which we talk about all the time, is embracing a tried and true revenue model, which is advertising. Adweek has reported that Perplexity is going to start selling ads. It doesn't sound like these are going to be the traditional kind of search ads that we're used to, at least to start. The company plans to start introducing native ads in the related questions section that you see at the bottom of Perplexity results. So you'll see if you use Perplexity to search for anything or ask any type of question, a section pops up titled Related that has all these follow-up questions and suggested topics you can kind of inquire about next. And soon brands will be able to actually influence what shows up in those questions. Perplexity has not confirmed exactly when these ads will roll out, but they did say they will launch in upcoming quarters. So Paul, what did you make of these two announcements and how they relate to search?
Nobody has any idea how to make money off of this. I mean, we've talked about before, like Google's dominant, moneymaker, profit engine is ads. And people like the way the generative search experience works right now, the ads aren't, it's not obvious how you're going to get as many click throughs on the ads. So I think
Mm,
Google's looking at saying like, how are we going to evolve so we're not as dependent upon the 10 blue links or the ads that appear above the 10 blue links, the 10 ads that appear above the 10 blue links. um, and Perplexity is realizing like, wow, you really need an ad model to make this viable.
yeah.
So yeah, it's just like the ongoing issue of generative AI seems to be what consumers are going to prefer. How do we make money doing it? I've been a big advocate. I really don't want ads in Perplexity. I'm
Yeah.
paying my $20 a month happily, but I also know that $20 a month is not going to be sufficient for them to build a scalable business model that's going to keep getting, the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in funding that they're going to need to actually compete and be anything of significance to a threat to Google's market share. Because as much as people talk about Perplexity, much you and I like it,
Yeah.
I mean, it is a very, very minuscule threat at all to Google's dominance in search right now. It's I don't know, it's probably not even like a tenth of a percentage point. I wouldn't imagine. So now that can change. Like obviously, disruption can happen fast, but they get a lot of love. But it's not like it's having any measurable impact on Google's business at the moment.
So, related to some more Google news, there's two new stories that came out that kind of have us wondering. We've talked about if Google is kind of trying to raise the profile of Demis Hassabis, who's the head of its AI efforts, head of Google at Google DeepMind. Now, we've spoken about Demis since literally the beginning of Marketing AI Institute as one of the most important people in AI. He's been integral to Google DeepMind, which resulted from Google acquiring his company in 2014. He's been personally involved in major AI breakthroughs, including AI beating a human champion at the game of Go, and AlphaFold, which is predicting the 3D structure of basically all known proteins. And these two stories that came out are all about Demis and how he is essentially trying to save Google from itself. One is called, quote, Can Demis Hassabis Save Google from Big Technology? And the other is called The Chess Master Trying to Propel Google's AI Push from the Wall Street Journal. Both are worth a read to kind of understand how did Google get to the current crossroads it's at with AI, and how did Demis influence that, and what could he influence going forward? But I think they're also really important for a different reason, which is there seem to be efforts within Google to raise Demis's profile. And one of these articles even blatantly speculates he may be tapped to be the next CEO, though he denies that. Now, Paul, can you connect the dots for us here? Why does this matter?
It just seems strategic on Google's part or on Demis's part.
Mm,
Like someone is intentionally positioning him in this way. Um, it would be really, the more I thought, it'd be really weird if it was Google.
mm,
Because you would think Sundar would have to be signing off on this strategy. Like,
right.
I don't know how Google works though internally with their spokespersons and like what people are allowed to say. Like I know Amazon is very rigid with who says what publicly. Like I think at Amazon you have to go through speaker training before you're even allowed to go represent Amazon at an
Mm,
event. Um, I don't know how Google works from that perspective, but I mean, Demis is an extremely influential and important person in AI. He's obviously extremely influential and important within Google. Um, there's certainly been questions around Sundar's leadership and if he's the right CEO for where they're going. I don't know that Demis would even want the job.
right,
Like,
right.
I mean, he sold to Google so he could be a researcher. Like, he didn't want to be a commercial, a CEO of a commercialized company. Like he's a researcher through and through. Um, so I don't know. I just interesting to keep an eye on. I listen to every interview Demis ever does. Like if there's ever a podcast that comes out, I listen to it. Like I just can't get enough. Like I think he's so smart. I think he's a genuine person. And I think he's going to be very important to where humanity goes, not just within AI and marketing and business, but like just humanity in general. So yeah, I don't know. Give it a listen. We'll drop there was a podcast he did recently with Dwarkesh in February that actually uh, was part of the motivation for the AI timeline episode that we did in March. That was one of the things I listened to on my trip when I created that timeline. So it's a really good interview. If you've never listened to an interview with Demis, there's all kinds of great podcast interviews he's done. He's been on Lex Friedman. Go listen to some of them. He's an amazing guy. Really fascinating to hear what he has to say.
So another development this past week, HubSpot has added a host of AI features to its existing CMS Hub product and rebranded this into kind of a new AI-powered offering called Content Hub. And Content Hub now has features like AI content repurposing capabilities, something called Brand Voice, which creates on-brand content at scale that's written in your unique brand voice, and things like AI translations, AI image generation, blog post narration, and more. So, Paul, we've long talked about HubSpot having both, worked at and you owned HubSpot's first ever partner agency. Like, as a longtime HubSpot watcher, what does this mean for HubSpot customers?
I mean, they've been pretty methodical about generative AI. And what I mean by that is like they haven't really been like first to market on any of this stuff. Like they're kind of like taking their time, plotting the right plays that'll add value to their customers. These seem like really good. We haven't tested. Did you test any of these yet within our platform? Have we had a chance to look at any of these?
I've tested a
firsthand?
couple of the content generation features, but not yet the remixing or the
Okay.
brand voice features.
Yes. So my main take, I think, is like, what is the value of it embedded within here versus we have Claude, we have ChatGPT, we have Gemini. Like we're already paying for all these other things that do similar things. I don't know if they're using. I assume they're using GPT 3.5 API to do this. Like they haven't built their own model, and I know that. So then the question becomes like, okay, so if I can go in and I can take a landing page and I can give it to this remix thing, and it then writes my emails and social shares and whatever. If I've already trained a GPT to do the exact same thing, and that GPT is using GPT 4 or 4.5, whatever comes next, am I just better off just continuing to use ChatGPT? Like, I don't know. And so that would be my question as a user. Test these capabilities if you're a HubSpot customer, compare them to the other tools you have and say, hey, actually, this is great. Like it's integrated with everything I've got in HubSpot. It saves me 20 minutes when I'm doing this. Like I'm just going to go ahead and use this. But like we're always saying, like it's all about just keep testing. You got these use cases, go play around with it, see if it's better than what you're using, and keep up with it. And the other thing I would say is just to address this. So last week, story was released that Google was considering an acquisition offer for HubSpot. So it's probably worth at least mentioning this. At this point, all it was someone leaked it. I don't know who would leak this or why they would leak it, other than maybe somebody who wanted to push this forward a little bit, is that Google was talking to their investment bankers about the idea of putting an offer together to buy HubSpot. That was the story. Not that an offer was pending, not that it had been made. You have to remember, like back in pre-IPO days, like 2010 or 11, I think the last round of funding HubSpot raised, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 32 million maybe. Google Ventures was one of the investors back then. Like it's not like they don't know each other. So it's kind of logical. There's a great segment on the All In podcast. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, Mike, but where they talked about why this deal might or might not make sense.
Yep.
So it's just kind of worth following. It would be by far Google's biggest acquisition ever. So I pulled this up. Their biggest acquisition ever was $12.5 billion for Motorola. Other than that, it was $3.2 billion for Nest, and YouTube was like $1.65 billion. So HubSpot would have to be 40 to 50 billion. I mean, HubSpot's like a $35 billion market cap company right now. You got to pay a premium on top of that. It's probably going to be in the 40 to 50 billion range. So would it even make sense for Google? I don't know, but it's out there. So I just wanted to make sure we at least acknowledge it.
So, OpenAI has shared the results of a small scale preview using a model they have called Voice Engine, which can accurately simulate voices using just 15 seconds of audio. So, this model can create what OpenAI calls emotive and realistic voices using just 15 seconds of an audio sample, which you can then use to create a voice that would say anything you like simply based on whatever text you give it. Now, OpenAI recognizes this has the potential to go very, very wrong. They released a statement about this saying, "We recognize that generating speech that resembles people's voices has serious risks, which are especially top of mind in an election year." However, they also shared a bunch of positive uses of the technology, including helping patients recover their voices. So this all comes amid heightened security concerns over the security of elections and also the potential for fraud here in a lot of different industries, including financial services, which somewhat related. The Wall Street Journal also just documented a report that financial services firms are now racing to counter AI generated calls that use deepfaked audio to game voice authentication software. So, Paul, you had wrote a bit on LinkedIn about this, and specifically that OpenAI has had this type of technology since late 2022 and didn't release it due to concerns around misuse. You wrote that other AI companies won't show this restraint. I mean, are we ready for voice deepfakes and synthetic audio?
Obviously, we are not as a society. Um, yeah, my what I was implying on the others won't have this restraint is this is the argument of like the EAC movement, the techno optimist is like just create it all, release it all. It's
Mm,
like really like are we really better off if we just give everyone this kind of capability? This is where I like sometimes I'm with that movement, and a lot of times I'm like, but there has to be some middle ground here. And this is one where I think a middle ground makes a lot of sense, that maybe we should not put all this stuff out in the world. But the way these things work is like if you're at one research lab and you are very bullish on this technology and the company you're at doesn't want to release it, then you're just going to go somewhere else and release
mm,
it somewhere else under an open source model. So it's going to get out. Like if we don't already have this ability from another company, these research labs are all working on the same problems. The talent moves between the research labs all the time. As an example, Noam Brown, who's an OpenAI researcher who we've talked about previously when he was at Meta and solved the game of diplomacy, and prior to that, Texas Hold'em and things like that. So he's now at OpenAI. And he said in a tweet, if you haven't disabled voice authentication for your bank account and had a conversation with your family about AI voice impersonation yet, now would be a good time.
mm.
Because he knows that just because OpenAI hasn't released it doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to release it. And so that would be my takeaway for you again, like from a personal perspective. Like I was in my Schwab account yesterday and it has an option to turn on voice authentication.
Mm.
Absolutely not. Like it's so I don't know why that in the banking industry and other industries, like that's a thing right now, because that seems like a really dangerous capability to offer, because this is pretty obviously technology that's 2 years old already. Um, and so I think it's just a good reminder too, that when we see that the AI we see today and we're blown away by it, just know that you're not even seeing the most advanced stuff. And like in some ways, there's going to be things that are created that you can't even comprehend. Um, and sometimes that tech's like a year or two old already before we see it. So just a good reminder that these research labs and the governments have AI technology that we don't know about yet, that is far more advanced than what we think the most advanced technology in the world is.
It's a good reminder. Now, as we wrap up here, I'm just going to quickly touch on two final stories. The first is that we got a new research paper from Google DeepMind that appears to debunk some of the major concerns that we all have about large language models. Specifically, it's a big concern that they don't get their facts straight, that they get factual information wrong or make stuff up. And it's a huge barrier to LLM adoption. But according to this research, the paper finds that certain LLM agents may be able to achieve superior performance on certain fact-checking tasks when compared to crowdsourced human annotators using a method called Search Augmented Factuality Evaluator, SAFE. Basically, it breaks down responses into individual facts, then fact checks each of them. And the researchers using this approach found that compared to human fact checkers, LLMs using this process were better at using Google search when they were given access to the internet to accurately fact check information. And it also found that LLMs are 20 times cheaper than human fact checkers for these types of tasks. So really what we're looking at here, Paul, it sounds like, is that there may be pathways forward where some of the big concerns around LLMs are solved for in the relatively near future. Was that kind of your read on this?
Yeah. I think I talked about this again in episode 87. Like, just assume any current weakness or limitation of these models is going to be solved for in the not too distant future. And so the takeaway there is, don't build a business, like don't create a startup around a limitation of these models, and don't pick a career path built on a current limitation of these models. You just kind of have to assume all this stuff. Like we talk about memory as another example, its ability to reason, its ability to get facts correct. All of that stuff is being solved for right now in every major research lab.
All right. And last but not least, you can now edit the images that you create in ChatGPT. Now, after you use DALL-E 3 right in ChatGPT to generate an image, you can now edit that image using text prompts. To do that, you just select an area of the image that you want to edit and then describe your changes using a natural language prompt. Or you can just tell ChatGPT what edit you want to make and where to make it. So Paul, it sounds like similar functionality to things like Adobe's generative fill and Midjourney's certain capabilities in some of the new versions. Like, does this in your mind make ChatGPT a serious image generation competitor?
I think it's more that they have distribution. So you can you can follow on later with the same features like Apple's going to do with a bunch of their generative AI stuff. And as long as you got a bunch of customers who are using your product over the other ones, like I don't pay for Adobe's products, so I don't have that capability. I played around with it this weekend. It's pretty slick. Like it works right in the app. Like I don't have to log into my computer to do it. So yeah, I think it's just an example of you can follow on with this stuff as long as you have a customer base that will use it. And it seems like a really nice feature add-on. And I think once we get Sora, we're going to get even more capabilities because I think Sora is going to be, I don't know if it's going to replace DALL-E, but it seems like they're kind of positioning it as both image and video generation and editing.
All right, Paul, we went through a ton of topics today. As a quick reminder to everyone, if you are not subscribed yet to our newsletter, we cover not only the topics this week in AI that we covered on the podcast, but we also go more in depth into them in the newsletter, and we cover all the other topics that we couldn't get to. So go to marketingaiinstitute.com/newsletter to get that weekly brief on what is happening that's most important in artificial intelligence. Last but not least, I would also say, if you have not rated the podcast yet and you have found value in it, please, please, please take a moment to just leave us a quick review on your podcasting platform of choice. It helps us get the episodes into the hands of even more people. So we very much appreciate that. Paul, thanks so much for breaking down this week in AI.
Thank you, Mike. And thanks everyone for listening. As always, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to The AI Show. Visit marketingaiinstitute.com to continue your AI learning journey and join more than 60,000 professionals and business leaders who have subscribed to the weekly newsletter, downloaded the AI blueprints, attended virtual and in-person events, taken our online AI courses, and engaged in the Slack community. Until next time, stay curious and explore AI.